Story 1. Former hairstylist. I was doing someone's hair who had extreme mats. She came in for me to demat her hair. She mentioned that she had just gotten out of a long hospital stay and that her hair had been neglected during that time. For anyone who doesn't know, we can see when you text on your phone. I was bored, sitting there 45 minutes into dematting her hair, and glanced at her phone. I saw a text about how she had tested positive for HIV. Okay, no big deal. This explained the recent hospital stay, and I know you can't get HIV from touching someone. About 2 hours later, when I finally finished dematting her hair, she got up to leave. That's when I realized she must have started her period, as there was blood in my chair where she had been sitting. I quickly cashed her out and researched how to disinfect blood from someone who is HIV positive. Thankfully, salon-grade disinfectants can work. While I was in the break room allowing the disinfectant to sit for the recommended amount of time, my manager nagged me about not taking more clients and letting the disinfectant sit instead of immediately wiping it off. She didn't believe me about the text and the blood. I didn't last long in that salon. Story 2. When a customer asked me to microwave their cold coffee while holding their tiny dog, and the dog bit me mid-sentence, I stood there like an unpaid extra in my own life. Story 3. I was in my mid-teens shingling roofs for a contractor. We were between jobs when he asked us to help at his small farm. He devised a contraption out of 10 foot long, 4-inch PVC pipes with holes drilled in them and rags stuffed in the holes. The idea was that herbicide would be poured into the PVC, soaking the rags through the holes. We would then carry the pipes around our necks and walk through the fields to apply the herbicide to the weeds. He originally intended it for his horses, but did not want them getting toxic chemicals on them. We quit on the spot. Story 4. There was a polar vortex in my area a few years ago, and nearly every business was closed except for my job at the bookstore, which was not essential enough to remain open. Guess who was scheduled to work that day? What really frustrated me was when I arrived, my boss said she was hoping I would call to say I couldn't come in. Perhaps she could have informed me of this before I ventured out in freezing weather. Story 5. I left prison to work in a less stressful job as hospital security, taking a $15 an hour pay cut. For months into working at the hospital, I found myself slipping in feces that a patient had smeared while we were trying to get him under control to prevent him from hurting himself. I quit shortly after that. If I wanted to continue in that environment, I would have stayed at the prison and earned twice as much. Story 6. Working at a local library, I found a used diaper crammed behind the books in the children's area. This wasn't the first time I had found one, but it was the first one I had found folded with the dirty side out. Story 7. I once worked as a server at a high-end restaurant. One day we had a VIP client, a famous actor, come in. He was a real challenge, demanding special treatment and being rude to the staff. At one point, he even threw a tantrum over the wine selection, and guess who had to deal with it? Yours truly. It was frustrating, as I was just there to do my job, not babysit a celebrity having a fit. Definitely a moment of, I don't get paid enough for this. Story 8. Manager. Are you against overtime? Me. Not at all. I'm just not doing it unless it's actually needed. Also me. I have a life outside of work. It's pretty great. I try to visit it daily. His reply. Maybe we should look into your work-life balance. Sir, the balance is fine. What you actually want is unpaid enthusiasm. Big difference. Then he asked, I noticed you used all your vacation days? Yes, that's correct. That's what vacation days are for. If you didn't want me to use them, maybe just specify 0 days off in the contract next time. Story 9. I worked 10 hours a day without overtime for 2 weeks straight to complete an analysis for my professor. He yelled at me and gave a speech about how he was good and questioned whether I was. It sounds strange in hindsight, but he frequently threatened to pull my funding and, with it, my visa to the United States. I told him I would quit 2 weeks later, and I was instructed to submit my 2-week notice or be escorted out of the building. This was for a modest annual salary of $57,000, and not even at an Ivy League institution. No, I'm not dealing with that situation. Story 10. Supervisor in charge at Tim Hortons for 3.5 years. Some people do not have proper hygiene habits. Story 11. I was a bank teller about 8 years ago in my early 20s. A cardiologist in my city came in to deposit a check. I saw he had 2 different checking accounts and asked him which one he wanted to use. To this day, I have no idea why this was so difficult for him to understand, but he became very upset, screaming loudly in the bank and demanding to see someone more knowledgeable who could actually assist him. He stormed away and sat down in the lobby waiting for another employee to walk in. In the meantime, I assisted the next customer, a very nice firefighter. While I was helping him, the angry doctor grew impatient and returned to yell at me again, demanding that I help him. I informed him that I was assisting another customer and would speak to him afterward. At this point, the doctor pulled out his phone and started filming, claiming that I refused to help him. The firefighter intervened, telling him to leave me alone as he had witnessed the entire interaction. From that experience, I resolved never to allow someone to speak to me in such a disrespectful manner again. Story 12. I had a few incidents while teaching. A parent broke into the school and threatened to fight me because her son had to sit out water day for assaulting multiple students and teachers. A student threatened to come to my home and kill me and my family after finding my address online. Other teachers laughed at me for reporting it because this student was the shortest in his class and therefore not considered a threat. This same student sexually assaulted me at the end of the school year, and other teachers talked about me as if I had done something wrong. A teacher confronted me and yelled in my face in front of the entire cafeteria over a misunderstanding. One of my coworkers reported her for endangering students, but she believed I was the one who reported her. When I tried to discuss the cafeteria incident with my principal, she basically told me it was my fault for being a snitch, even though I had never reported her before. A more senior employee, old enough to be my parent, invited several of us out for dinner. She and her husband kept trying to get me to drink with them and hinted that they were swingers. I declined invitations to future outings, and she took it very personally. When I left that school, she spread a rumor that I was a lesbian, which was a significant issue at a Catholic school. I have since left education and now work in insurance, earning more than I ever did with my 4-year degree and certifications in teaching. While I was teaching, I also worked as an aftercare teacher, summer camp coordinator, department head, and new teacher mentor. I made $35,000 per year after taxes. Story 13. When I was in college working as a stock boy in a department store, they wanted me to act like a security guard after an increase in shoplifting. After a few confrontations that escalated, I thought to myself, no way, you're paying me minimum wage to put price tags on stock and shelve it. This wasn't part of the job description. Engaging in physical confrontations over a stolen pack of razor blades is beyond my pay grade. Story 14. When I was a newly qualified doctor, I was asked to examine an elderly patient's rectum to facilitate a medical procedure. Story 15. Either a clogged sink full of vomit or a massive pile of feces that missed the bowl completely. It was like a can of chili. One I had to scoop with gloved hands, and the other I had to push down a floor drain with a mop. Essentially, I had to stomp it down. I didn't know how to say no yet. Story 16. I am an electrician in facilities maintenance. I assist with all other trades and perform any necessary labor. However, I do not get paid enough to clean or remove toilets and urinals. I will not do those tasks. Story 17. A blockage in the organic waste tank outlet resulted in 130 cubic meters of waste. The valve was bent, so when I thought it was closed and attempted to remove the flange to clear the blockage, I was covered in waste from head to toe, including sanitary towels, condoms, wet wipes, and a dog carcass. Story 18. I once had to clean a public restroom after someone really missed the toilet. They somehow managed to create a complete mess on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. Story 19. I was cleaning the local Target and was nearly done for the day. While I was upstairs in the kitchen and staff areas, the manager asked me to clean up a large mess left by an elderly lady in the changing room. I did so, nearly vomiting from the awful odor. The next day, I learned that the lady had watched me clean it up with a smile and then continued her shopping. I've been a cleaner for 15 years, and this barely ranks among the top 10 worst things I've seen or had to clean. Story 20. I worked a job with 3 colleagues. One was fired, and another left, but no one was hired to replace them. I had to pick up the slack and do the work of 3 people for a few months. During a company meeting, the manager stated that we were at maximum staff and not hiring, so we had to get used to it. Then I was reprimanded for something that wasn't my fault. That was after 10 years of hard work at that company. Story 21. This was before the pandemic when I was a server at a restaurant during a brunch shift that featured bottomless mimosas. 2 women, both in their early 40s, came in, and I thought it would be an easy table, especially since I was also serving a large group of people in their 20s having a Sunday fun day. They both ordered salads and asked if they could have the orange juice and champagne separately so they could mix them themselves. The manager agreed. After dropping off their salads, they requested more champagne. I cleared their plates and they asked for more champagne again. They didn't seem tipsy, so I let them linger a bit longer as they enjoyed their Sunday morning. I later found out the bartender had given them 2 large carafes of champagne, which he had promised to keep an eye on since I was busy with the larger group on the other side of the floor. I noticed one of the women had her head down on the table, and before I could ask if she was okay, I saw a bright green vomit erupt violently from her mouth, covering the entire table and spilling over the edge. It was shocking how much came out and how green it was. All I remember is my manager rushing over and telling me to get rags. After that incident, my serving career effectively came to an end. Story 22. Running errands with my boss and listening to him endlessly discuss a political philosophy that is completely at odds with my beliefs. Story 23. When I worked as a field-based therapist in South Los Angeles, I found myself in the middle of many chaotic situations that I felt I was not compensated adequately for. Sex workers approached my car while I waited to pick up my clients. Gang members and drug dealers confronted me with crowbars, questioning my presence. Homeless individuals engaged in inappropriate behavior in public. I witnessed 2 naked individuals having sex outside their car. There were numerous fights and drug transactions. I saw one of my clients get arrested while I was there for their session. The most shocking incident was when my colleague was struck over the head with a stick by a passerby after we finished a session with a client. Additionally, I visited a client's home and discovered that their neighbor's house had just been shot at, with one of the bullets striking my client's residence. It was quite an experience. Story 24. Working in the bar, I had to clean up after my shift. Walking into one cubicle, I found someone had shoved a pint glass down the toilet and then used it as a toilet. Whoever you are, that is disgusting, and I hope you face consequences for your actions. This has happened over a couple of shifts, and my colleagues had to deal with it as well. Story 25. In 2000, I worked at a small adult store. A man came in wearing no pants and started handling adult toys. My boss told me to kick him out, and I said, "I'll quit. I'm not dealing with that." Story 26. When I found a used needle in the movie theater bathroom and my manager handed me rubber gloves as if it were no big deal, I realized that minimum wage isn't worth potentially life-threatening situations. I quit on the spot. Story 27. Being spat on by a child while the parent does not intervene or provide guidance. Story 28. Being in the basement of Parliament and seeing all the rusty gas pipes, which are still in use, is not safe at all. Story 29. I provided technical support in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Eventually, one more adult had a temper tantrum because they needed to vent about the consequences of their refusal to read the instructions, and that was the last incident. Story 30. I worked in the outdoor lawn and garden section of Lowe's, earning $7.75 per hour in 2011. I spent long days in the Texas sun, mostly loading thousands of pounds of stones, fencing, sod, mulch, and soil into vehicles. I put in a lot of hard work for 3 months until my 3-month review. My boss said, "You've done great. You are the only employee in this section to have multiple people seek me out for praise. Not a single complaint. You have never missed a shift or shown up late." My raise was 20 cents, just 20 cents. I then got a job in a Walmart warehouse starting at over double that amount. It was even harder work, but with incentives, I made almost $25 per hour with benefits. Story 31. I was a department manager at Walmart. I disliked that position, so I stepped down. They reduced my pay to align with my lower position and informed me that I had to continue performing my previous duties at the lower rate until they could find a replacement. I submitted my 2 weeks' notice at that moment and left for the day. That was a Friday, and I had the weekend off. When I returned on Monday, I couldn't clock in. They explained that they had let me go. I did not receive adequate compensation. Good riddance. Story 32. Bussing tables in high school, I went to a corner booth where a child had vomited in the back of it, deep in the cracks. The parents did nothing to clean it. I saw it and just walked away. Story 33. The principal investigator on one of my projects asked me to call 250K 12 schools and document various personally identifiable information and demographics within 48 hours. I was so upset that I dropped out of graduate school on the spot. Story 34. I had to handle a deceased individual in an aged care home because none of the care staff could manage the situation. I was working in the office at the time and had no reason to be there helping to move the body from the floor to the bed in preparation for it to be bagged. Story 35. I worked at a convenience store and was asked to wipe the tile ceiling of the men's room. I figured the customers had been in and that I had finally fixed the fan, so there were some handprints. However, it seemed that someone had made a mess on the ceiling. I told my manager that I would not do it. Story 36. I don't have the time or inclination to list everything. I worked as a forklift operator in a large warehouse for a while, and anyone familiar with that job understands these moments. When you clock in, walk back to the charging station, grab the forklift, and then turn the corner to see huge rows of products spilled all over the floor, with thousands of individual small packages scattered across the warehouse. You have to pick them all up, carry them back to be rewrapped, and put them away. Now, imagine rows of these shrink-wrapped packages full of yarn cones. Then there are the die-house stories of thousands of pounds, or tens of thousands of yards, of small tubular material used for making socks and similar items, wet, steaming hot, and tied in a big spaghetti knot. Story 37. I am 20 years old and working for a chemical and biological supply company. One morning, a fire started in a hazardous materials storage building filled with flammable chemicals. The safety inspector asked me to retrieve the key to the building, so I brought it to him. Then he asked me to open the front door to the room on fire. I handed the key back to him and told him, "I don't get paid enough for that." Story 38. The container of stool exploded under the hood, and I got splattered in the uncovered portion. Bacteria produce a significant amount of gas in certain cases, and this was one of them. It was a Clostridioides difficile infection. Story 39. I worked as a receptionist at a gym. I discovered a man practicing naked yoga in the tanning room. When I informed him that this was not permitted, he responded that he paid for a full membership and could do whatever he wanted. That $14 per hour was not enough to cover the therapy I would need. Story 40. An employee with extensive knowledge about a lucrative product exhibited bipolar tendencies or borderline personality traits was prone to anger and was unwilling to share necessary information for making changes or improvements. She caused all others on the project to resign. 3 managers assigned me to work with her. After a few weeks, I observed that they were all fearful of her and unwilling to confront her directly. At double my salary, it still would not have been worth it, so I left. Story 41. I worked in retail, and we had a mandatory meeting about what to do in the event of an active shooter. I was advised to essentially act as a human shield. Story 42. I was in a support role for an operational team, doing a lot of administrative work, purchasing, payroll, and budget tracking. I had to navigate many challenges with human resources to resolve pay issues and was covering another vacancy while still performing my own duties. There was a colleague who had been there for a year less than I had. He was a wealthy local but hid behind a beach bum and surfer persona. He was likable, but he didn't like me, and I could sense that from our first meeting. He did not see me as an equal. He was into a lot of bro science. I was somewhat overweight, and I had a job that some people thought anyone could do, could be easily automated, or permitted them to treat me like their personal secretary. I tried not to take it personally and dismissed the negative vibes because he was a temporary employee. One day, during a particularly stressful week, everything compounded. He was at my desk while I was trying to show him a spreadsheet that I needed him to update, but he stood too close to me. He kept moving closer with his hands on his hips, taking up unnecessary space and ignoring my personal boundaries. This situation triggered a panic attack. In my year and a half of working there, I had never experienced a problem with anyone. I spent an hour and a half in my office crying and then trying to calm myself down enough to continue my day. One person asked me if I was okay. I made the mistake of confiding in them about my post-traumatic stress disorder. They were diplomatic and kind, but comments like, "He is a good guy. I don't think it was intentional. You got to stop overthinking things." And, "Yeah, we're not always in touch with our feelings," were not what I needed to hear from someone I commute 2 hours round trip each day to ensure is paid on time and correctly. When I worked at a gym, I was constantly criticized by the manager and her influencer friends because I didn't look like a fitness model. Even though I managed social media, using my own phone, live-streamed a sporting event during the COVID-19 pandemic, I am not a tech person, organized multiple events, built trophies and awards on the day of the events, cleaned toilets, repaired equipment, trained staff, and taught a yoga class on Saturdays. The final straw was when a coach who openly cyberbullied a transgender staff member was still allowed to keep their coaching position after that staff member overdosed. We were paid $12 an hour, and I had multiple clothes ruined by bleach and oil. In the Navy, I was repeatedly sexually assaulted and bullied by multiple people over the course of years, and I was discarded the moment I finally sought mental health treatment. There are no rewards for going above and beyond, but the moment you stop, you are in trouble because you have already set a precedent. Unless someone's life depends on it, just do the bare minimum. Most people genuinely get ahead by being likable, not solely by how good they are at their job. These jobs don't care about you, and your coworkers are not your friends. Everyone is just performing, so take care of yourself and assert your boundaries. Story 43. I am an adjunct professor. One semester, I was filling in for a vacant administration position on a part-time basis. This was always meant to be temporary. Without warning, the college decided to eliminate all the full-time administrators in this department and simply expected the program to run itself. Since I was the only administrator not to be laid off, someone said to me, "I hear you're going to be holding down the fort." Nope, the fort has fallen. Last one out, bring the flag. Story 44. When a client asked to cancel her custom order that my business was fulfilling for the cost of materials, she took me to small claims court when I informed her, as I had multiple times, and as stated in our contract and on our website, that all custom orders are non-refundable because we cannot reuse materials and the project was almost complete. Even if I wanted to refund her what was left after the cost of materials, we had completed the project at cost as a gesture of goodwill because we were a new business and it seemed like an interesting project. It hasn't gone to court yet, so unfortunately, I cannot predict how this situation will conclude. The best part of it? This had nothing to do with the project itself. She simply had a disagreement with my wife and decided that she no longer wanted to support my business. This experience taught me not to be overly accommodating. We are a business, not a charity. They are not our friends. They are our clients. If you're skilled at something, never do it for free. At the cost of materials is effectively for free. The most amusing part is that she will likely feel embarrassed when I explain what she ordered in court. I am a design engineer with a business and another unique venture, and this order was through the latter. I am willing to make anything, and I truly mean anything. It's quite a story. Story 45. I had young children, and they wanted me to work every weekend training foster parents. It was, of course, a job where family is the most important thing. Story 46. I had to assist with a cleanup after a product was damaged during inventory. I work in retail and accidents happen. However, we must be cautious because they can create a hazardous situation due to the shards that result. Story 47. When my student wrote an anonymous note and posted it in the bathroom, it told me to harm myself. It was the third hate message I received from them that week, but no disciplinary action was taken. Story 48. Working for Dollar General had me running the register, stocking, consolidating the backroom, signing in vendors, signing in trucks, downstocking, sweeping, mopping, cleaning the bathroom, and restocking supplies. I also counted down tills, completed paperwork, deposited money, and occasionally drove to the bank on their behalf. All for a beautiful $16 an hour. Imagine running the register when someone's EBT card isn't working and they are manually entering information. The lines are getting long, and self-checkout was discontinued company-wide during my time there. On top of that, there were constant stocking expectations. You have an entire cart full of items that are already fully stocked, but for some reason, it needs to go out immediately. While also managing the trash, sweeping, and preparing to lock up, I literally had to run to the register from the back room because bells weren't allowed at the front. For the majority of my shifts, I was the only one in the store as a closer. Then you have customers complaining about prices and how the price tag doesn't match the actual price. An elderly woman yelled at me about contacting the Better Business Bureau. Story 49. When my operations manager told me to ration the toilet paper by handing out sheets to the warehouse workers, I refused. The workers were then instructed to bring their own rolls. Story 50. I worked for a television production company focused on fashion, interviews, and various events. I was a cameraman with my own equipment, so the production company only needed to pay me for the material I recorded and the taxi fares to attend meetings. Eventually, they owed me 200,000 Argentine pesos, which, though not a large sum, helped me cover expenses as a university student. They pleaded with me to continue working. After I resigned, I was overwhelmed with messages and calls pleading for me to return. Story 51. I wasn't allowed time off when my brother was in the hospital, but they gave me a week for the funeral. I remember my boss refusing the paid time off requests and then doing a complete turnaround by including human resources in an email to tell me to take the entire week off. It turns out nothing was urgent, but he automatically rejected every paid time off request to maintain coverage in our accounting department. It makes me sick to think about how casually they handled it. I interviewed somewhere 9 years later after obtaining a Master of Business Administration, and he was on the other side of the table at one point. He actually brought it up and tried to convince me that he was good about work-life balance. I got up and left. Story 52. A person in a stolen wheelchair was alternating between crying and yelling at me because I wouldn't sell them a $3,000 television for $240. After about 10 minutes, I handed my keys to my department manager and informed them I was going to lunch. Story 53. I had an upright overstock freezer full of about 200 pounds of frozen dog food go through a full freeze-thaw cycle in 32-degree heat during the summer, as the air conditioning in the shop was inadequate. I didn't discover the situation until several days later when I opened the freezer and found what I can only describe as an entire exploded side of ground meat and viscera spread across every shelf, crevice, and surface inside the unit. It looked like it had been loaded into the freezer with a machine gun. I was getting paid $10.50 Canadian an hour. I called my manager, showed him the mess, and said, "Good luck. I will never forget the smell." Story 54. It was Friday night in a college town. I worked at a Taco Bell that was 2 blocks from Fraternity Row and the Student Union, one of the largest in the nation. We got slammed every weekend, and 8 of us were scheduled when my shift began. 3 had called in sick, leaving us almost 50% understaffed. The ones who showed up steadily quit because work conditions were so bad. By the time 2 a.m. rolled around and we got our bar rush, it was just me and an assistant manager. She had called everybody, and nobody volunteered to come in to help us. I was faster on the line than she was, so she worked the register while I made all the food. If I ran low, I'd call it out and she would take a break from the register to run to the walk-in to get me more food, allowing me to make food as fast as possible without interruption. At its longest, we had a line of around 150 people, mostly intoxicated, waiting for food. We were just about the only restaurant within walking distance that was open that late. Things were unimaginably bad, but that wasn't my "I don't get paid enough for this" moment. When 4:30 a.m. rolled around, my manager locked the doors and we finished serving everyone still in line. Nobody had worked the lobby at all for 6 hours during a massive rush. Trash wasn't just overflowing the trash can. Each can was literally engulfed in a pile of garbage. You could barely see the cans because each was buried in a mound of trash. Seeing the state of the lobby was my first, I don't get paid enough for this moment. By the time closing arrived, we were supposed to have 4 staff members on weekends, and closing was supposed to take an hour. There were only 2 of us, and just cleaning the lobby took me more than 2 hours, let alone everything else we were supposed to do. By 6:30 a.m., the morning crew came in to open the store, and I was still not done with the lobby. I asked the store manager if we could go home and the morning crew could help us finish cleaning up the place. "No," he said. "It's your job to close the store, not ours." I'm not a quitter, but I came within a hair's breadth of walking out at that moment. That was my second, I don't get paid enough for this moment. Sometimes it sucks to have a strong work ethic. Story 55. A high school student went into the bathroom, used the toilet, and left a book on top of it like a flag on a mountain. Other students alerted me while I was in the hallway. There were cameras in the hallway. Imagine being a parent and receiving a call from the principal about that. Story 56. Someone walked in who had managed to lose a dildo. At some point, he exclaimed, "It's touching my tailbone," while I called for emergency medical services. He was prioritized appropriately for his injury, so it took them 20 minutes to arrive, likely because the crew needed time to collect themselves. During that time, he wandered off. Story 57. Truthfully, I am a nurse. My alarm goes off at 3 a.m. At 3:01 a.m., while I am working up the energy to make my coffee, I have that thought. But the first time was August 3rd, 1982. Our first full day of boot camp started with a metal trash can bouncing across the deck and waking up knowing only 2 of the 80 guys in the room with me, while someone was yelling unintelligible and conflicting directions at us as we tried to get our bearings. Story 58. Former bedside nurse. In the beginning of COVID-19, people were dying. We still didn't know if the virus was spread through droplets, airborne, or both. I had 2 very young children at home and older parents who were immunocompromised. The hospital corporation decided that staff wearing masks would scare patients and send the wrong message, thus decreasing business. They locked up all the masks. The only way to get one was if you had a fever, which was not considered an acceptable reason to stay home. When we made masks and brought them in, our jobs were threatened. Although I was not well compensated, no amount of money was enough to risk the lives of my family, patients, and myself. It was clear the company did not care if anyone died as long as their profits remained. I no longer work as a bedside nurse. Story 59. A housekeeper in a rest home encountered a challenging situation with a man who had severe diarrhea throughout his bathroom. It was everywhere. On the floor, both inside and outside the toilet, the back of the door, the shower, the sink, and even under the sink. Remarkably, some of it even ended up on the ceiling. It was a distressing sight. Story 60. I am responsible for 9 helicopters and 15 mechanics, only to discover that most of the mechanics earn more than I do. Story 61. I worked at McDonald's when I was in high school. One day, a kid urinated in the play area tubes, and I was asked to clean it. No way. You pay me $6 an hour. I have no financial obligations. Fire me, I guess. Spoiler, they didn't. Story 62. Doing community service after a youthful indiscretion at a municipal recycling center was challenging. The work was outside during the dead of winter, and the temperature was around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. One of the town's dump trucks pulled into the yard, filled with mixed junk that needed to be unloaded and sorted by material type. After unloading the waste, we discovered a dead German Shepherd frozen, solid to the truck's bed. The supervisor handed me a coal shovel and instructed me to use it to remove the dog's corpse from the bed. I refused to do it. I believed we needed to work at least 6 hours to receive credit for our hours served, but I had only been there 3 or 4 hours. I climbed out of the truck's bed, returned the shovel to the supervisor, and stated that I was fine with losing the hours I had worked. There was absolutely no way I would do that. He found someone else to handle it and allowed me to keep my hours, but extracting a frozen dog from the bed of a dump truck was definitely beyond my capabilities at that moment. Story 63. I used to work at a video store. An older fellow asked if we had a public washroom. No, we didn't. He looked uncertain about his next move. He continued to browse the movie choices for about 20 minutes. When he came up to the counter to purchase the movies, he reeked. I told him he had to leave. I couldn't have him in the store smelling like that. He became angry. Eventually, he left after I gagged and warned him that if he didn't go, I would call the police to have him removed. He then went outside, looked at me through the window, and shook something out of his pant leg before getting in his car and leaving. I distinctly remember thinking that I didn't get paid enough for this. Story 64. When people come in and don't know their Apple ID password, it becomes my problem. Story 65. Work in a daycare, trying to calm 12 crying and some screaming tired toddlers for their nap while a tour is happening outside in the hall, and we have to maintain our composure. Story 66. Taking over the majority of responsibility during a court-martial that was supposed to be run by a non-commissioned officer who was 2 ranks above me, because he bragged about his skills in running court-martials, but in fact, he was not effective. I did not receive credit for my contributions to the court-martial. Additionally, I transcribed multiple interviews at the last minute because no one else took responsibility. Thank you, Army, for contributing to my frustration with individuals who boast about their abilities while undermining others. On a side note, in retail, without naming the company, I trained someone to be a manager of my crew, even though my entire crew wanted me to take on that role. I watched the whole team leave one by one, week by week. I had to train 3 people whose mental aptitude was severely lacking. In summary, I believe leadership is not worth pursuing until I can trust the team I work with. I refuse to engage in the politics of extra pay if it compromises my sanity. Story 67. I joined a family-owned business for a different job, but they did not secure the contract with the railway. I had to work in a machine where steel dust was everywhere, and I have an allergy to dust. You can imagine how I managed to tolerate that environment. Story 68. When the owner of a German shipping line criticized me for someone else's mistake, I packed my belongings and left immediately without returning. Story 69. Every day back in my 20s in the 1990s, while working as an emergency medical technician and later as a paramedic on a private ambulance service. Story 70. I worked minimum wage at a fast food restaurant. Every day, after lunch, an employee left a large mess that clogged the toilet. It was the main reason I quit. Story 71. I used to work at a facility that processed old Xerox machines, and I was on a disassembly line, taking the black toner out, which would leave any exposed skin completely covered in black toner. The only way to get it off was to use a large tank of alcohol they had on the wall and scrub hard. I think I was getting paid no more than $12 an hour, and this was around 2003. I didn't last long at that job. Story 72. I worked for a major oil and gas production company. One very cold day, I was sent to dig out part of a temporary dam we had to put up. I made good money, but I never dreamed I would end up digging a ditch. Story 73. I worked as an evening custodian for a Texas school district, assigned to an elementary school. A first grader defecated in the sink of the first grade bathroom. The next day, I received an apology letter allegedly written by the student responsible. Story 74. I had a gatehouse employee speaking and shouting at me very rudely because I had the nerve to show up while he was supposed to be on his dinner break. I said, "Sir, calm down. I'm happy to sit here and wait for the remaining time. I'm paid by the hour, and I'm not going home for the next 3 days, so everything is fine." Story 75. I worked in a customer service job over the phone at a company that sold phones to elderly individuals, and I found them to be quite difficult. I wonder if those who work at nursing homes have similar experiences with them. They are often unkind and expect respect in return. Story 76. Getting a job offer elsewhere that included a $10,000 raise, no on-call requirements, and the option to work from home. Nothing signals goodbye like a better offer. Story 77. I was pulling wire in a hospital. I am tall and shave my head. I reached up and moved a ceiling tile in a busy main hallway. A large sticky mouse trap fell out, maybe 2 inches from my face. It landed on the ground, and I saw that it had 4 dead bats stuck to it. Needless to say, I do not get paid enough to pick that up. Story 78. Oh, Just the other day, my boss sent me a calendar invite for an event at 6:30 p.m. with no information. Story 79. I was a manager of a team in a small business with 20 employees. I had to speak to a male subordinate about leaving excessive mess in the restroom multiple times. He was a great employee, but he needs to clean up after himself. We have clients using this restroom as well. Story 80. I arrived at a client's home 3 weeks ago to find Trump signs in the yard. Upon entering, I was greeted by a disturbing display of Nazi memorabilia, including swastikas, Nazi uniforms, Hitler Youth uniforms, and numerous pieces of paraphernalia in each room. I was supposed to assist an elderly man with his physical therapy, and his 25-year-old nephew lived with him. The restroom I was instructed to use was the one the nephew used. The seat was covered in multiple layers of stains, and there was inadequate clothing on the floor. I stepped outside, called the agency, and expressed my discomfort in a home filled with Nazi memorabilia. Noting that there was more adult feces that did not belong to the patient than my pay reflected. I informed them I would not be returning. Story 81. It was a summer day camp for children as young as 3, involving a lot of babysitting. A parent dropped off their 4-year-old child for the first time without informing any of the counselors that the child did not speak English and had never been away from them. The child became extremely distressed, had an accident, and needed to be held down by a few staff members while they tried to calm him and change him. He then broke free and ran around the room and hallway, still in distress. It was a very traumatic day for him as we couldn't communicate with him. The situation required a thorough sanitation of the area, and we had to call his parent back to help calm him down. Overall, it was a challenging day for everyone involved. I was 15 years old at the time. Story 82. Since I was safe and overall I liked that customer service job, I was fine, but the moment was crazy. I was a retail cashier alone in the store when a man in his 60s or 70s came in. He was making small talk, nothing new, and then he mentioned my piercings. I have a septum piercing, both nostrils pierced, and snake bite piercings. He said, "Oh, you have a lot of these." And I just agreed as I am used to it. Then he said, "I've never kissed a girl with lip piercings before. Mind you, I am 20 years old." I didn't reply, and he continued, saying, "How would that feel?" Since I still wasn't replying, he added, I guess it's the same as usual." I remained silent, and he engaged in some more small talk before leaving. He also mentioned his wife afterward, joking about the fact that she didn't want to go out that day because the weather was cold. I sat for about 5 minutes trying to comprehend what was going through his head. It makes for a really interesting story, though. Story 83. Before I say it, I want to preface this with the fact that most of the clients we worked with at this company had developmental disabilities, so I do not blame the client, nor did I get mad at her. I worked as a direct support professional for a few months. It's really just a fancy title for being a caregiver. The client hated shower time, but it was mandatory for me to shower her first thing in the morning to get her ready for the day. She already had some waste when I got her out of bed. Unfortunately, she decided to protest this one morning, started screaming, and purposely acted like she couldn't get her leg into the shower. Mind you, I already had her halfway in. She then pulled her other leg out and fast walked out of the bathroom, sitting down in the middle of the floor in the tiny hallway from her bathroom to her bedroom. She lived in her own apartment, so this wasn't a facility where I could ask for help getting her off the floor, and I wasn't allowed to try lifting her on my own. To make matters worse, she produced more waste and got it all over her carpet, then decided to lay down and ended up rolling around in it. If it hadn't been for a coworker being with a client in the apartment next door, she would have been on the floor until my relief, who was my direct supervisor at the time, arrived, or I would have had to call emergency services just to get her up. I only made $13.50 per hour at this job, and I'm pretty sure that number was only to compete with other caregiving companies in the area. Story 84. I was working as a quality assurance automation contractor at a company that does not develop software but uses it extensively. I realized that the entire automation framework was held together with minimal resources, and my manager wanted something essentially impossible done in the next few weeks. I thought, I don't get paid enough for this. Then I had a sinking feeling in my stomach when I remembered my contract rate. Oh wait, I thought, I do get paid enough for this. I have to make this happen. Story 85. I have several experiences. In a housekeeping job at private homes, I was expected to pick up used condoms at one man's residence. The bed and floor were littered with at least 20 full condoms. While working at an ice cream shop, I was instructed to simply throw away cockroaches without any attempts to treat the issue. In another position at a chicken restaurant, I was told to bleach wash the raw chicken if it started to smell before selling it. Story 86. I was working in a high school as an administrator when there was a bomb threat. The police asked me to search the building with them because I knew what was normal and what was out of place. That moment defined why I decided to stop working in a school. My wife was a teacher outside with the kids, and one of them joked, "It would be funny if it just went boom." She lost her temper and yelled, "It's not your husband in there right now." Took me 2 weeks to calm her down, and we decided she did not deserve to be a widow. Story 87. A woman screamed at me for an hour about not having all of her lumber delivered that day, and the contractor was booked for the next morning. I had nothing to do with the order and had just returned from a month-long trip to a children's hospital where my daughter had heart surgery. She wasn't leaving without her lumber, and we didn't have it in stock. There was no way I could fix the problem that day. It was closing time, and she just stood there screaming at me. I have post-traumatic stress disorder from that experience. Story 88. The patient came in 4 weeks ago with full upper dentures that needed to be impressioned, sent to the dental lab and made. I sent the impressions to the lab. I called the lab, handed the case over, and noted the return date from the lab in the patient's records. I left for the day immediately after due to a family emergency. Fast forward to the day the patient shows up. It's the morning, and I come to work later since I had a late start that day. The lab case is not there, so I'm anxious. The patient is already seated. I called the other assistant, Sheena, who was present. She must have the case. I helped with hygiene for an hour. An hour later, while finishing up in sterilization, I heard the patient with the denture case yelling at the other assistant. I poked my head in, and the patient was in tears. Turned out that after I had called the lab, someone came to take the lab case. When they returned to the lab, the technician realized they needed a doctor's sign-off narrative specifically for this case. After I had left, the technician came back, and Sheena took the case back to the doctor. However, she hadn't done that. She told the lab they could leave, which they hesitantly did under her authority. Then Sheena went to the back and started working on making a denture in the makeshift lab we have for part-time technicians completing their hours for technical school. This was problematic since no assistant, especially one not certified by the state, is allowed to do this. She delivered that denture, which immediately fell apart in the patient's mouth. The doctor felt humiliated and quickly realized this was not the lab's fault. Initially, Sheena tried to blame me, but I had a solid track record of when I left and returned. The lab even supported my account, confirming I was not the one who took the case back a second time. The lab also confirmed that the first time they received the case, it was as it should have looked upon arrival. They had never received the case back a second time. I do not understand why Sheena thought this would work, particularly to lie when there was so much evidence against her from the start. As a result, she received a significant fine and was fired immediately. I left the practice a couple of months later, but I felt terrible for the patient, as she had initially been hesitant about getting dentures. Additionally, her poor decision cost the patient over $2,400 since the dentures contained implants. The insurance covered most of the cost the first time. However, since we had to restart her case, she had to pay over $2,400 plus the amount she had already paid for the first failed case. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.